In the grand, sprawling tapestry of human history, countless empires have risen and fallen. The Babylonians with their towering ziggurats and hanging gardens, the Persians, masters of a vast and efficient empire, the Greeks who gave the world philosophy and democracy, the Romans whose legions and laws shaped the very foundations of Western civilization. These were mighty cultures that stretched across continents, boasting immense power, sophisticated art, and pantheons of powerful gods. They commanded vast armies, built monumental structures that still defy imagination, and left behind legacies that echo in our modern world. Yet, when the creator of the universe, the singular, unseen God, chose to unfold his master plan for humanity, he didn't turn to the bustling heart of these empires. He didn't select the most powerful king, the most revered philosopher, or the most decorated general. Instead, his gaze fell upon a tiny, almost insignificant strip of land nestled at the turbulent crossroads of 3 continents, a land bridge that would be coveted, conquered, and soaked in blood for millennia to come. And for his people, he didn't choose a mighty established race. He chose one man, an elderly, unknown pagan from a city that worshipped the moon, and promised to build a world-changing nation from his barren wife. This is the divine paradox, the central, provocative enigma that has echoed through the ages. Why Israel? In a world teeming with nations and peoples, why did God focus his entire unfolding drama of redemption on this one small, often rebellious family line? Many have mistaken this choice for favoritism, a sign of ethnic superiority or divine partiality. But that is a profound, fundamental misunderstanding of the divine strategy. The choice of Israel was never about elevating one nation above all others for its own sake. It was a strategic, missional decision, conceived in eternity past, designed from the very beginning to bring salvation and blessing to all nations through a specific chosen vessel. Join us on a 4,000-year investigation into the single most consequential choice in human history. We will journey deep into the ancient world, exploring the pagan cultures that surrounded Abraham, deconstructing the layers of the divine covenant, and tracing the golden thread of a promise through the lives of flawed patriarchs, the crucible of slavery, and the holy fire of Mount Sinai. This is not just their story. It is the ultimate explanation of God's master plan for all humanity. Part 1. The world before the promise. A reset was needed to understand the radical nature of God's choice. We must first immerse ourselves in the world into which that choice was made. Imagine the era after the Great Flood. Humanity had been given a fresh start, a clean slate. The memory of God's awesome power and righteous judgment was, for a time, seared into the collective consciousness of Noah's descendants. Yet, how tragically short is human memory. The pinnacle of this post-flood rebellion unfolds on the plain of Shinar, the Tower of Babel. This was not merely an ambitious architectural project. It was a defiant philosophical and theological statement. It was humanity unified in language and purpose, declaring its collective independence from its creator. The book of Genesis tells us their motive. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Their ambition was a direct contradiction to God's first command to Noah's family, to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Instead, they sought to consolidate power, to centralize their strength, and to reach for the heavens on their own terms, under their own name. God's intervention, confusing their languages and scattering them across the face of the earth, was not the act of a threatened, insecure deity. It was an act of profound and necessary mercy. He knew that human unity, when centered on pride and rebellion, does not lead to utopia. It leads to amplified evil, unchecked tyranny, and ultimate self-destruction. In the wake of Babel, as humanity fractured and spread, the true knowledge of the one invisible Creator God faded like a distant memory. A deep spiritual amnesia swept over the globe. In place of the Creator, humanity created gods in its own image. The Apostle Paul described this tragic exchange centuries later. They traded the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. This was the dawn of a new yet ancient darkness, the age of rampant polytheism. Let us journey to Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization and the homeland of the man God would eventually choose. In the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians worshipped a complex and often terrifying pantheon. Their chief gods were cosmic forces: Anu, the distant god of the sky; Enlil, the volatile god of wind and storms who could bring floods or famine on a whim; and Enki, the clever god of water and wisdom. These were not benevolent beings. They were powerful, capricious, and demanded constant appeasement. The Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, which contains a flood story with eerie parallels to the biblical account, portrays the gods deciding to destroy humanity simply because their noise was disturbing their sleep. This was the spiritual atmosphere. Humanity lived in fear of petty, powerful deities. In Abram's own city of Ur, the patron deity was Nana, the moon god, whose magnificent ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid, dominated the city skyline. Life revolved around the temple, its rituals, and its priesthood. Travel west to the land of Egypt. Here, the pantheon was even more elaborate and deeply intertwined with the state. The pharaoh himself was not merely a king. He was considered a living god, the incarnation of Horus. The sun god Ra sailed across the sky in a celestial boat, battling the serpent of chaos, Apep, each night. Osiris ruled the underworld, offering a complex path to an afterlife for those who could afford the elaborate rituals and pass the judgment of the gods. Isis, his wife, was a powerful mother goddess. The entire civilization was a theocracy built on a foundation of hundreds of gods, each governing a different aspect of life and death. Now look to the land of Canaan, the very land God would promise to Abram. It was a land caught between these great powers, a melting pot of cultures and cults. The Canaanite religion was notoriously brutal and debauched. Their chief god was El, a remote father figure, but the more active and popular deity was Baal, the storm god, who controlled the rain and fertility of the land. His worship often involved ecstatic, self-mutilating rituals and ritual prostitution. Even more horrifying was the worship of Moloch, a god to whom parents would sacrifice their own children, passing them through fire in gruesome ceremonies. This was the world, a world saturated with fear, ritual, and blood. Humanity had not just forgotten God, they had replaced him with a legion of divine monsters, crafted in the image of their own worst impulses. This was God's dilemma. How could he reveal his true nature, his holiness, his justice, his unwavering covenantal love to a world that had collectively lost the capacity to even conceive of such a being? A global announcement would be meaningless noise. A display of raw power could be misinterpreted as the act of just another cosmic tyrant. His solution was as profound as it was patient. He would not overwhelm the world with force. He would choose a starting point. He would select one man, one family, and through them forge a nation. Through this one nation, he would work methodically and intimately within the messy, unpredictable flow of human history. They would be his pilot project, his chosen instrument, the vessel through which he would reintroduce himself to his own creation. The choice was not random, it was a necessary, strategic, radical reset. Part 2. The Unconditional Covenant, the Call of Abraham. The man God chose was named Abram. As we've seen, he hailed from the sophisticated pagan center of Ur. The Bible is unflinchingly honest about his background. He was not a righteous man on a spiritual quest, a philosopher seeking the one true God among the many idols of his homeland. He was a pagan, chosen out of a pagan world by an act of sheer, unmerited sovereign grace. The leader Joshua, generations later, would remind the people of Israel of their humble and idolatrous origins. Long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. God did not choose Abram because he was worthy. God chose Abram to make him worthy. By every human measure, Abram was the most unlikely of candidates. At 75 years old, he was past his prime, a man whose life was largely set. His wife, Sarai, was 65 and barren, a condition considered a mark of divine disfavor and a source of deep personal shame in their culture. He was a man with no heir, no future, no legacy, and it is to this man that God makes the most astonishing, history-altering promise ever recorded. In Genesis chapter 12, God issues a call that is both a command and an invitation. It would sever Abram from everything he had ever known, his land, his culture, his extended family, and his gods. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. This radical command to leave was immediately followed by a three-pillar covenant, a divine promise that would become the bedrock of Israel's identity and the central plot of the entire biblical narrative. The first pillar was the promise of land. To your offspring I will give this land. God was not calling Abram to a life of nomadic aimlessness. He was calling him to a specific geographical location, Canaan, that would be a tangible physical inheritance for his descendants, a home. The second pillar was the promise of descendants. And I will make of you a great nation. To a childless old man, this was a promise of a biological impossibility. This was not just a promise of one son, but of a great nation, a people as numerous as the dust of the earth, and later as the stars in the sky. This nation would not be born of human strength or planning, but of a divine miracle, a testament to God's power to bring life out of barrenness. But it is the third pillar that reveals the true global world-changing scope of God's intention, the promise of blessing. God tells Abram, I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Let that sink in. From the very first sentence of this covenant, God's plan was never exclusively for Abram's family. The ultimate goal was universal. Israel was chosen not to hoard the blessing, but to be the conduit of that blessing to the entire world. They were elected for the sake of everyone else. Critically, we must understand the nature of this covenant. It was unconditional. Its fulfillment did not depend on Abram's perfection or the future obedience of his descendants. This is dramatically and mysteriously illustrated in a ceremony in Genesis 15. God commands Abram to cut several animals in half and arrange the pieces opposite each other, creating a grisly path of blood between them. This was the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of signing a legally binding and solemn contract, a covenant cutting. Both parties would walk down that path of blood, signifying with their action, if I break this covenant, may I become like these animals, torn asunder. It was the most serious oath one could make. But in a profound vision, God causes a deep, supernatural sleep to fall upon Abram. He is a passive observer, and as darkness falls, he watches as a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch symbols of God's holy, consuming presence, pass between the pieces alone. Abram did not walk the path, only God did. The theological meaning is breathtaking and unmistakable. God was taking the entire weight, all the obligations, and all the penalties of the promise upon himself. He was essentially saying, "This covenant depends solely on my faithfulness, my character, my unbreakable word. Even when your descendants fail, even when they are unfaithful, I will remain faithful. I will see this promise through to its end, even if it costs me everything." This is the foundation of Israel's chosen status. It wasn't earned by merit, it was a gift of grace, sealed by God's own unilateral, unbreakable oath. God would later reaffirm and expand this covenant. In Genesis 17, he introduces circumcision as the physical sign of the covenant and changes Abram's name to Abraham, father of a multitude, and Sarai's name to Sarah, princess. And in the most excruciating test of all, on Mount Moriah, God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, the very son through whom the promise was to be fulfilled. At the last moment, God provides a ram as a substitute. This event, the Akedah, is not only the ultimate test of Abraham's faith, showing his willingness to trust God above all else, but it also serves as a profound prophetic foreshadowing. It is a divine drama pointing to a future day when God himself would provide the ultimate substitute, his own son, on a hill near that very same spot, to seal an even greater covenant for all humanity. Part 3. Forging a people from family to nation. The fulfillment of this divine promise was not a smooth, linear progression. It was a long, messy, and intensely human story played out on the stage of history by flawed individuals. God's faithfulness was the constant. Human failure was the variable. The promise passed from Abraham to his miracle son, Isaac. Isaac's life was quieter, yet he too faced tests. His own wife, Rebekah, was barren for 20 years before he prayed, and God opened her womb, reminding the family that this promise was always sustained by divine intervention, not human capability. From Isaac, the promise was passed contentiously to his younger son, Jacob. Jacob was a deceiver, a manipulator, a man who lived by his wits. He stole his twin brother Esau's birthright for a bowl of stew and tricked his blind, elderly father to steal his blessing. He fled for his life and, in his desperation, encountered God at Bethel, dreaming of a ladder connecting heaven and earth. For 20 years he lived in exile, being deceived by his own uncle Laban before God called him home. The defining moment of Jacob's life came on the eve of his reunion with the brother he had wronged. He spent an entire night wrestling with a mysterious divine being by the river Jabbok. He emerges from the struggle with a permanent limp, a symbol of his broken self-reliance, but also with a new name and a new identity. The divine being tells him, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." This name, which means he struggles with God, would come to define the very character of the nation he fathered, a people in constant, dynamic, and often contentious relationship with their Creator. Jacob's 12 sons, the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, were a dysfunctional family at best. Their story is one of jealousy, pride, and betrayal, culminating in their selling of their brother, Joseph, into slavery. Yet even this wicked act was woven into God's sovereign plan. Joseph's story, his unjust imprisonment in Egypt, his interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, and his meteoric rise to become the second most powerful man in the known world, is a masterclass in divine providence. What his brothers meant for evil, Joseph would later declare, God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. Joseph's wisdom saved Egypt and the surrounding nations from a catastrophic famine, and it was the mechanism that brought his entire family, the 70 souls who comprised the fledgling nation of Israel, down into the safety and provision of Egypt. For a time, they prospered in the land of Goshen. But as the generations passed, a new Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. The hospitality soured into suspicion, and suspicion into oppression. For 400 years they multiplied under the hot sun of Egypt, their groans unheard by the Egyptian gods, but not by the God of their fathers. Egypt, the place of refuge, became a crucible of affliction. Their slavery was brutal, designed to crush their bodies and their spirit, but it served a divine purpose. It stripped them of any assimilation into Egyptian culture. It forged a collective identity of suffering, and it caused them, finally, to cry out to the one God who could save them. We've just traced the incredible, often painful journey of a single family, chosen by God and forged into a nation through covenant, struggle, and slavery. The story only gets deeper and more dramatic from here, as we witness the greatest showdown of the ancient world, a direct confrontation between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt. We will then journey to the foot of a thundering mountain to uncover the divine constitution given at Sinai and reveal the ultimate world-changing mission entrusted to this people. If you're finding this deep dive into biblical history and theology as fascinating as we do, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next chapter of this epic investigation. Part 4. The Crucible of a Nation, Egypt and the Exodus. The man God chose to lead his people out of bondage was, like Abraham, an unlikely candidate. Moses, a Hebrew by birth, was raised as a prince of Egypt, educated in all its wisdom. After killing an Egyptian taskmaster, he fled into the Midianite desert, becoming a humble shepherd for 40 years. It was there, in the barren wilderness, that God appeared to him in a burning bush, a fire that burned but did not consume. The confrontation that followed was not merely between Moses and Pharaoh. It was a cosmic showdown between Yahweh, the God of Israel, and the entire pantheon of Egypt. The 10 plagues were not random acts of destruction. They were targeted strategic assaults on the gods of the most powerful empire on earth. When God turned the Nile to blood, he demonstrated his power over Hapi, the spirit of the Nile. The plague of frogs was a mockery of Heket, the frog-headed goddess of fertility. The plague of darkness was a direct humiliation of Ra, the mighty sun god, the chief deity of the Egyptian pantheon. With each successive plague, God systematically dismantled the religious and philosophical foundations of Egypt, proving that its gods were powerless before the God of slaves. The final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the most terrifying and the most merciful. It was here that God instituted the Passover. Each Israelite family was to sacrifice a spotless lamb and paint its blood on the doorposts of their home. When the angel of death swept through the land, he would pass over every house marked by the blood. The Passover was not just their shield, it was their redemption. A powerful lesson that life comes through the death of a substitute. This would become the central festival of Israel, a yearly remembrance of their salvation through sacrifice. The climax of the Exodus, the parting of the Red Sea, was the act that sealed their identity forever. With Pharaoh's army closing in, God opened a path through the impossible, leading his people through the waters on dry ground before crashing the sea back down upon their enemies. On the other side of that sea, they were no longer just a collection of tribes. They were a redeemed nation, bound to their Savior God. The song they sang that day became their first national anthem, a hymn of praise to Yahweh, their warrior and their Redeemer. Part 5. The Divine Constitution, Law, Tabernacle, and Holiness. In the stark, imposing wilderness of Mount Sinai, God formalized his relationship with his newly redeemed people. He gave them the law through Moses. It is crucial to understand the purpose of the law. It was not a ladder of good works to climb to earn their salvation or their chosen status. They were already chosen by grace through the promise to Abraham. They were already saved by grace through the blood of the Passover lamb. The law was the divine constitution for an already redeemed people. It was a gift, teaching them how to live as God's treasured possession, how to function as His representatives in a fallen world. The Ten Commandments formed the ethical core of this constitution, revealing God's timeless moral character. The civil laws governed their society, establishing a standard of justice, compassion, and fairness that was revolutionary in the ancient world. The ceremonial laws, with their complex system of sacrifices and purity rituals, taught them about the holiness of God and the seriousness of sin. The entire legal code, the Torah, was designed to make them a distinct people. Central to this new constitution was the tabernacle, a portable tent sanctuary where God's own presence would dwell in the midst of their camp. The tabernacle was a masterpiece of theological symbolism. Its structure, with its outer court, holy place, and the most holy place, taught the people that a holy God cannot be approached casually. Access was limited, mediated through a priesthood and through sacrifice. Every detail, the bronze altar for sacrifice, the golden lampstand, the table of showbread, the veil woven with cherubim, was a visual aid, a shadow pointing to a greater, heavenly reality and to the future work of the ultimate high priest, the Messiah. At its heart, in the most holy place, lay the Ark of the Covenant containing the stone tablets of the law, a pot of manna and Aaron's rod that budded, symbols of God's provision, authority, and His covenant relationship with them. Above it, the Shekinah glory, the visible presence of God, hovered. All of this was designed to instill one central concept into the heart of Israel: holiness. The Hebrew word is kadosh, which means to be set apart, other, different. God is holy, utterly separate from sin and corruption, and His people were called to be holy. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. Their diet, their clothing, their calendar, their entire way of life was designed to make them distinct from the surrounding pagan nations, to make them a living, breathing showcase of the character of the one true God. Part 6, the mission, vault, showcase, vessel. Now we arrive at the heart of our question, but with a deeper understanding of the immense divine effort involved. Why? Why go to all this trouble? The answer lies in the threefold mission God entrusted to Israel. Mission number 1, to be the vault for divine revelation. In a world of shifting myths and oral traditions, Israel was chosen to be the custodians of God's written word. As the Apostle Paul definitively states, their chief advantage was that they were entrusted with the oracles of God. This was a sacred trust of immense proportions. The role of the scribes was not merely to copy, but to preserve with painstaking, fearsome accuracy. They developed intricate systems for counting letters, words, and paragraphs to ensure that no error crept in. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 was a stunning vindication of their faithfulness. When scholars compared the scroll of Isaiah, found in the Qumran caves, which dated to more than a century before Christ, with the medieval manuscripts used for our modern Bibles, they were found to be virtually identical. For over 1,000 years of copying by hand, the text had been preserved with almost perfect fidelity. Without the faithfulness of the Jewish people, we would not have the Old Testament. They were the divine library, the sacred vault for God's revelation to humanity. Mission number 2, to be the showcase of a holy God. God's second purpose was for Israel to be a living, breathing demonstration of His character. He declared at Sinai, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." They were meant to be a priest nation, mediating the knowledge of God to the rest of the world. Their society was designed to be a divine exhibit. Their history is a tragic and glorious record of their successes and failures in this mission. During the reigns of David and Solomon, Israel's wisdom and glory did indeed attract the attention of the world, as exemplified by the Queen of Sheba's visit. But for much of their history, they failed spectacularly. The period of the Judges was a dark cycle of apostasy and oppression. The kingdom divided and fell into civil war. Kings led the people into the very idolatry they were called to reject. It was during these dark times that God raised up the prophets, men like Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Amos, who served as his covenant prosecutors, calling the nation back to the law and reminding them of their holy calling. Even in their failure, Israel served God's purpose, demonstrating the consequences of sin and the relentless, pursuing love of a God who refused to give up on his people. Mission number 3, to be the vessel for the global Savior. This is the ultimate purpose, the climax of the entire 4,000-year story. Israel was the chosen lineage through which the Messiah, the Savior of the world, would be born. The promise that all the families of the earth shall be blessed is the golden thread woven throughout the entire Old Testament. It begins with the cryptic promise in the Garden of Eden of a seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. It is narrowed to the line of Abraham, then to the tribe of Judah, then to the royal house of King David, to whom God promised a descendant whose kingdom would last forever. 2 Samuel 7. The prophets painted an increasingly detailed portrait of this coming Messiah. Micah foretold his birthplace. "But you, O Bethlehem, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel." Isaiah described his miraculous virgin birth and his sacrificial death in stunning detail, 700 years before it happened. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. Daniel predicted the exact timeline of his arrival and crucifixion, Daniel 9. And it is in Jesus of Nazareth that all these ancient threads converge. He is the ultimate fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham. Through his sinless life, sacrificial death, and glorious resurrection, Jesus Christ, the Son of God and Son of David, threw open the doors of salvation, not just to the nation of Israel, but to every person from every tribe, tongue, and nation on earth. The blessing that was entrusted to one family finally exploded onto the world scene, available to all. God's choice of Israel was not to exclude the world, but to create the necessary historical, cultural, and theological pathway to include the world in his plan of salvation. They were the vessel, meticulously prepared over millennia, to carry the most precious gift imaginable, the Redeemer for all humankind. Part 7, The Promise Fulfilled and the Future Hope. With the arrival of Jesus the Messiah, the story of Israel did not end. It entered a new and glorious chapter. Jesus fulfilled the law not by abolishing it, but by being its perfect embodiment. He was the ultimate sacrifice to which all the temple sacrifices pointed. He was the true king from David's line. Through his death and resurrection, he inaugurated the new covenant which the prophet Jeremiah had foretold centuries earlier. This would be a covenant not written on tablets of stone, but on human hearts. This new covenant did not replace the people of Israel, but it dramatically expanded the family of God, creating a new community, the church, composed of both Jews and Gentiles who place their faith in him. The wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile, Paul writes, has been torn down in Christ. Yet the story of the nation of Israel itself is not over. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, dedicates 3 entire chapters to wrestling with the question of his people's future. He concludes that even in their widespread rejection of the Messiah, God has not rejected them. He speaks of a future day when all Israel will be saved, a time when they will be grafted back into the olive tree of God's people. The continued existence of the Jewish people and the re-establishment of the nation of Israel in 1948 remain a powerful and debated topic in biblical prophecy, a sign to many that God's final chapter for them has yet to be written. Conclusion: the echo of a 4,000-year-old promise. So we return to our initial question: why Israel? He chose them not because they were better, stronger, or more righteous than any other nation. He chose them to be his instrument in a world that had lost its way. He chose them to be the vault, the faithful guardians who would protect his precious word, so that we, thousands of years later, could know his truth. He chose them to be the showcase, the living, breathing demonstration of his holiness and his covenant-keeping love, a light shining in the deepest darkness. And most importantly, he chose them to be the vessel, the specific historical lineage that would bring forth the Messiah, Jesus Christ, making the ultimate blessing of salvation available to all the families of the earth. The choice of Israel was never an act of exclusive favoritism. It was the most radical act of strategic inclusion the world has ever seen. It was the long, patient, often painful, and breathtakingly beautiful unfolding of a divine rescue mission for all of humanity. The echo of that 4,000-year-old promise, made to an old man under a starry Mesopotamian sky, still resounds today. It is a testament to a God who sees, who calls, who promises, and who, above all, is faithful. And now it presents each of us with a profound choice. This grand, unfolding story of redemption, which began with one man's journey of faith, is now a finished work, offered to you as a free gift. The only question that remains is, will you accept your place in it? We would love to hear your thoughts on this incredible story. What was the most profound part of this journey for you? Share your biggest takeaway in the comments below.